Welcome to Soul Food Coffee House in Redmond, Washington on this last Wednesday of the month of March, which means that we are here to talk about the astrology of April 2018. As always, before I jump into the material, and I will try to keep this short as I can, there's a few upcoming events that I'd like to let you know about, and there are postcards and business cards over there. Please help yourself to the postcards on the events. The first event that I want to share with you is the United Astrology Conference, May 24th through 29th. This is in Chicago, Illinois. This is, as we astrologers refer to UAC, as the grandmother of all astrology conferences. It's held only once every 4 or 5 years. There are lecturers from about 130 countries, and people come from all over the world. It's an amazing event, whether you're a beginner, a student, or a practicing professional. If you have any interest or any questions about this, send me an email, give me a call, ask me after this evening, or go to uacastrology.com. And for those of you out there in internet land, the link is right there or there. I always point and it's always slightly different, but there's a link there. The next thing I want to talk about is, this is really funny, because I'm going to be talking about the Brighton Bush workshop and the Bali workshop, and I'm getting a call on Skype as we talk right now from Evelyn Roberts, who produces the Bali workshop. She's in Bali right now. I'm going to ignore her. The second thing I want to talk about is, how did I do that? Is Brighton Bush Hot Springs. And I'm going to type this in here. Hang on one second. Breitenbush, Brighton Bush. Come on. So Brighton Bush Hot Springs is an amazing retreat center in the midst of the old growth forest in Central Oregon. It's about an hour drive from Salem, Oregon, which is about an hour drive from Portland, Oregon, which is about a 2 or 3 hour drive from Seattle here. It is off the grid, no cell phones, no internet. I've been doing workshops there twice a year. Been doing the first weekend in January on the astrology of the year ahead for about 13 years now. Jeff Jower and I did them for many years together. And I've been doing a summer workshop there, retreat. This summer, the workshop is from July 29th to August 2nd. It's a magical place. The topic is basically bringing the planets down into our lives. We'll be doing chart work with the attendees' charts as the curriculum, and we'll be doing some experiential astrology, some astro drama, some cool stuff, and it's a totally magical place. You can find out more about this by going to breitenbush.com. Again, the link is there somewhere, and it will fill up. It's limited to about 25 people, and these workshops always fill up. So if you're interested, think about it, do some inquiry. Again, if you want to talk about it or find out more about it, I'm certainly open to that. Last thing I want to talk about is Evelyn, who was on Skype just now. That's like so weird. It's not like we talk every day or anything. And this can be right here. I've been doing workshops for Evelyn Roberts, who's been producing workshops of mine in, I've done them in Mexico, Bali, and India. This will be my 7th, I think, 8-day retreat in Bali. It's a totally magical spot. How many people here have been to Bali? Some. Any? Oh man, okay. Guys you.
I've been.
Yeah, you. More than once. It's a magical, magical place. We have 7-8 days of astrology work. We get to soak in some of the local culture. It's basically from the time you land in Bali, you're picked up by a conference rep. It's at a retreat center that's off in the jungle near the cultural capital of Bali called Ubud, U-B-U-D. It's definitely a cool place to stay at. Evelyn actually built this retreat center. It's also limited to about 25 people, so you won't get lost in a group. And again, the chart work of our individual charts becomes a lot of the fabric of the curriculum for the week. There's more information on Evelyn's, on the Heaven and Earth Workshops site, and we can click here to workshops, and there is the Think Cosmically, Act Locally, Putting Astrology to Work in Our Lives with Rick Levine, that's me, and there's an entire complete curriculum day by day of what we'll be doing if you're interested, and it's magical, and it too will fill up. Oh, it is from October 6th through the 15th, and that's this year. And again, if you have any inkling of interest at all, send me an email, give me a call, be happy to talk with you about it. It's quite an event. Most people who go put an extra day or 2 or 3 or a week on either the before or after, because Bali is a magical place that can capture your imagination and take it for quite a ride. Okay. That's what I have to say about that. Before I jump into the material, though, 2 quick things. One is we're just coming off the annual NORWAC weekend. How many here were at NORWAC? I know a few of you were. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Cool. Did you have fun?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. NORWAC is the Northwest Astrology Conference. I gave 2 lectures there. It's I consider NORWAC my home playing field. I've been going to NORWACs since 1990, which means that I've gone to 28 of them. I missed one somewhere in the middle. I was in England and I didn't go to one. But it's an amazing and fun conference. It will be again next spring. And those of you who are there, you get it. All right, so I just wanted to mention NORWAC, and a lot of us, I think, are still on NORWAC highs. It's like after astrology conferences, it's kind of like a postpartum depression often, because you're so plugged in with a community that speaks your language. And for me, when I go to these, there are many people that I've known for 30 plus years, some even longer, who I get to see once or twice or 3 times a year at conferences around the country or around the world. Speaking of the around the world, some of you know that I lectured in Kolkata, India, back the end of January, and I think I mentioned a little bit about that for those of you who are on my Facebook page, which, by the way, is facebook.com/Rick Levine Astrologer. There is a link to a lecture that I gave there, for which I was awarded the International Astrologer of the Year Award. Kind of crazy. There were astrologers, it's cool. It was weird. I was called out and brought up on front stage, and music played for way too long, kind of like an Indian version of Pomp and Circumstance. And I was given a trophy too large to take back on the airplane with me, and a real jeweled crown that was put on my head. And the pictures are on Facebook, but the award was given for everyone. There were 75 lecturers, and I think about 40 of them were from the West. And when I say the West, from India's point of view, I mean Iraq, South Africa, Rhodesia, Norway, Serbia, Turkey, Cyprus, England, France, Italy, South America, the United States, Canada, all over the world. Oh, Australia. And so people, the lecturers were there from all over the world, and everyone, like a TED conference kinda, everyone gave a half-hour talk. So as crazy as this sounds, I flew to Calcutta to give a half-hour talk. Wow. Or Kolkata as the new name. Anyhow, the talk that I gave on fate and free will, and how to understand that based upon astrology, because astrology is very much tied up in trying to look at and either predict or at least work with the future. And so this talk was entitled Fate versus Free Will. It's a 28-minute talk, and it is available on YouTube. You can link to it either from my Facebook page, but for those of you online, right there's the link. You may have to copy it and paste it or type it. I'm not sure how that link will work. And you will end up on the YouTube channel for the conference, and my talk is there in its entirety. It's short. And you don't need to know a whole lot of astrology to get something out of the talk. Okay, enough. Preamble, prologue, whatever, done. So, April 2018. The drama, the saga continues. We have some interesting stuff happening next month. A lot of the month, however, is tied up in the planet Saturn, the planet Mars, in Aries, and in Capricorn. So how does this work? So here's a chart for, it's not a chart for today. Here's a chart for, let's go this a day at a time. Here's a chart for April 1st. And in this chart, we can see a few things. First of all, for those of you who are not accustomed to looking at charts, what we are looking at here is basically a representation of where the planets are in relationship to the various signs. And one of the things that we can see here is that Mars and Saturn are at the same degree in Capricorn on April 1st. And this conjunction becomes an important part of the statement of the entire month of April. Let me just, I have so many pieces of paper here. I want the one that's sorted by date. There we go. All right, so Mars actually conjuncts. Mars moves faster than Saturn. It takes Saturn about 30 years, 29 and a half years to go all the way around once. It takes Mars less than 2 years to go around once. And as such, Mars catches up with Saturn about every other year. And the thing, though, is that Saturn right now is in its home sign of Capricorn. It spends about 2.5 years in each sign. And so this is Mars's first connection with Saturn while Saturn is in his home sign. Saturn is the planet of structure, of stability, of reality. Saturn is the karma planet. You do good shit, you get good stuff that happens. You don't do anything, you fall behind. You do bad stuff, you go to jail or whatever. I mean, I'm kind of exaggerating it, but Saturn is you get what you deserve. Saturn is often considered to be a bad planet because most of us humans are lazy and we deserve shit. I don't really believe that, but it's easy to not do the work and therefore find ourselves on the short end of the Saturn stick or whip, and no, don't go there. So Saturn is about a wall. Saturn is reality. It's structure. Saturn is at home in Capricorn. All right, let's shift now to the time of year that we are in. We are in the spring time of year, although some days you wouldn't know it. But spring is defined by the astrological movement from Earth's point of view, of the sun into the sign of Aries. In Western astrology, the signs of the zodiac are tied to the seasons, not the stars. And therefore, therefore, Aries is the first sign of the year. Aries is the beginning. Aries is the infant baby just born who doesn't know that anything exists outside its own fingers and toes. It's the I, me, mine. It's the, Aries is the creative energy though, because when you see a little green sprout, just the tip of the sprout, you can't tell whether it's a blade of grass, poison ivy, or an oak tree. Because in the beginning, Aries is simply undifferentiated creation. It's the urge to make something out of nothing. That's what Aries is. So Aries is basically about pushing forward. It's also, in astrology, every planet relates to a sign, every sign relates to a planet. Some signs have two planets that relate to it, and some planets relate to two signs. Aries is the sign that relates to the planet Mars. Mars is the planet of war, assertion, aggression. Mars is the hit it planet. Mars is physicality. It's sports. One of the only absolutely indisputable statistical collections that demonstrate there's something to astrology, even though those of us who practice it know there is. But a French statistician named Michel Gauquelin, back in the 60s and 70s, and even into the 80s, collected tens of thousands of timed births, because in France, all birth times are recorded since the French Revolution. And what he found was that there was no connection between your sun sign, the I'm an Aries, you're a Vegetarius, you're a Crises, or whatever those signs are. There's no connection at all that he could find between career and your sun sign. However, he found a very strong, statistically relevant correlation between the planet rising, the planet coming up over the ascendant, the rising sign, the planet in the rising sign, if you will, and the profession of those people who were outstanding in their profession. And what Gauquelin found was that there was a very high predominance of extraordinary, in other words, achieved, not just an athlete, but people who distinguished athletes and military people who were born with Mars rising. Mars is the planet of physicality. It's the planet of pushing forward. It's the planet of assertion. When assertion is too much, it becomes aggression. Mars is about defending your territory or offending, stepping into someone else's space. So here's the theme for the month. We have Mercury retrograde that we'll talk about in a moment. We have Mercury, the Sun, and Uranus all in the sign of Aries. Venus was in Aries. Venus just escaped into Taurus, and we'll talk about that in a moment, because that's actually a sweet note on what's going on. I guess we're talking about it now. Venus is the planet associated with Taurus. So Venus, a week ago, moved from Aries into Taurus just a few days ago, and as such, Venus is home. Venus is sensual and sweet and physical in Taurus, which is an earth sign, physical. But we have Mercury retrograde, the Sun and Uranus all in fire starter, initiating, assertive, aggressive Aries. Every year in spring, the Sun spends a month moving through Aries. But right now, not only is the Sun in Aries, but Mercury, which was ahead of the Sun and turned retrograde a week ago, Mercury is now moving retrograde and is now lined up with the Sun, coming between the Earth and the Sun. So even though there's all this energy to push ahead and push forward, that's what Aries does, Mercury's moving backwards. It's like standing in an ocean with the tide coming up, and yet even though the tide is coming up, you can still feel the undertow when the wave is coming up, and you can feel the sand under your feet pulling out. That's kind of like what Mercury retrograde is right now. Because Mercury retrograde says, yes, everything's moving forward into new territory, but our minds, Mercury is communication, our intellect, our minds are moving backwards. We're covering territory that we already covered. We'll come back to that Mercury retrograde in a few minutes. But here we have all these planets in Aries moving ahead, Mercury moving backward, and here comes the key. The key is that the key or ruling planet of Aries is Mars. Mars has entered Capricorn, and for the last week has been getting closer and closer to Saturn. And when feisty, fiery, red-hot, forward, assertive, aggressive Mars hits Saturn, it's like running into a wall. The frustration we may feel in our lives that's still building and will continue to build through the first week of April is largely due to the fact that we have all this pushing ahead energy of the planets in Aries, and yet Mars in Capricorn, Mars likes being in Capricorn, oddly enough. Why? Because in Aries, Mars can start 100 things and not finish anything. Mars in Aries is a cardinal sign. It likes to initiate. In Capricorn, Mars finishes what he starts. I know I talked about this last month because Mars actually entered Capricorn in March. We're here to talk about April, and so I'm not allowed to go back and talk. I'm kidding. But the fact is that Mars likes being in Capricorn because it has staying power. It has persistence. It has endurance. And so Mars in Capricorn finishes the job. But as Mars gets closer and closer to Saturn, it realizes, excuse me, would someone pour me a little bit of water? And actually I think, no, thank you. Haley's on it. Thank you, Haley. So Mars, as it pushes closer and closer to Saturn, is getting this feeling of dread, like, oh my God, maybe I've gone too much too fast. Maybe I need to slow down. Or for most of us who have Aries in our charts, we're going so fast, the last thing we're thinking about is slowing down until all of a sudden we look down and we realize the road curved and we didn't, and we're flying. And it's like the guy who's falling off the skyscraper, and the person on the 40th floor sees this body going down. He goes, how's it going? He goes, so far so good. I saw a Tibetan Rinpoche Lama many years ago who said the following, and it was so fascinating, I actually canceled some appointments to go see this guy. His name was Nagpa Chogyam Rinpoche. And what he said was, wouldn't it be a shame if while falling to one's death, one couldn't enjoy the sun shining upon one's face and the wind whistling through one's hair? Because that's what we're all doing.
Yeah, that's right.
This guy was hot stuff. He was really good. All right, so we have this thing of Mars running into Saturn, but that only lasts for a day or a week as it builds. It culminates on April 2nd, but Mars stays in Capricorn for the entire month. But right now, we got this dilemma. And a dilemma is basically two tracks that lead in different directions. One of the lemmas, and it is a word, one of the lemmas is this whole feisty, fiery, energetic, assertive, aggressive, pushing forward, physical Aries stuff. And Mars is doing Aries bidding in Capricorn right now. And Capricorn's going, no, ain't gonna happen. Stop. Slow down. It's the Paul Simon song, slow down, you're moving too fast. Gotta make this Capricorn last. I think that we will see this. We may already be seeing this in some of the political movements that are reality-driven backlashes to something or someone out of control or going too fast. Need I say more? That as Mars joins up with Saturn, as Aries needs to deal with the reality of Capricorn, it's like being issued a reality check. It's like getting the report card saying, this is okay, this is not, and you need to deal with this right now before you go forward. You see, because Jeff, many of you know Jeff Jower, or knew Jeff Jower, who passed away a few years ago, who used to share this stage with me here for some 7 years, my old astrology cohort. Jeff used to say, Saturn's the planet that says no but means yes. And every time he said it in public, I'd feel obliged to say, he doesn't mean on a date. What he meant was that when Saturn says no, when you're doing something and going forward and Saturn puts the stop, it creates a setback, it creates a delay. Saturn says, it's like you're doing a remodel on your home, you got the contractors lined up, you have all the material settled and everything, and you're waiting for the building permit, and the building permit comes on the day that everything's supposed to start, and it says you've been turned down, and there's like 14 other hoops you need to jump through. That's how Saturn works. Saturn's the speed limit. Saturn's the cop who's giving you the ticket for going too fast. And so in a way, what's happening out there and in here, because the two are always the same, is that in some ways we're all bumping into some aspect of ourselves that if it's gone too fast, if it's taken too much liberty, if it's stepped on other people's toes or other people's tender spots, Saturn basically says, stop it. Stop it. No more. You can't do that until you go back to the drawing board and get it right. Now I want to bounce back to Mercury retrograde in Aries, because when Mercury turns retrograde three times a year, what Mercury retrograde says is you have a chance to get it right before you move ahead. People whine and complain about Mercury retrograde, and I should here tell you a very quick story, because for years I've been holding the position that retrogrades aren't bad, and that Mercury retrograde is not a big deal. It basically impacts people who are not paying attention, and my word is that if you're a communication wimp, then Mercury will knock you on your butt every time it goes retrograde. Now, aside from that, I would note that the two largest regional internet outages that were entire parts of the country going down for several hours happened about 10-12 years ago, and they both occurred on days when Mercury stationed to turn retrograde. In other words, on the day which is the most potent part of the Mercury retrograde cycle, when Mercury's forward motion from Earth's point of view stopped and it began moving backwards from Earth's point of view. I'm not saying there's nothing to Mercury retrograde, but retrograde Mercury is often a chance to, instead of be blindly pushing ahead, to go back and clean up stuff and to get stuff right, which feeds right into the Saturn stopping Mars. Do you see how they're similar, but coming from different point of views? All right, here's my quick story. I've been running around in circles trying to make up for going to India, getting the flu when I got back. I write a daily column. I've been way behind on that, and I've really been trying to get everything caught up. And then into this, I went away for the weekend to go to Norwalk, which takes me off the horoscope writing thing for a few days. And I worked very late on Thursday night, and on Friday morning, I'm getting things together. I have 2 talks I'm doing at Norwalk, and a whole bunch of stuff that I'm transferring from my desktop to my trusty laptop, and I head off to Norwalk. My first talk is on Friday afternoon. It's normally a 20-minute, half-hour drive from Redmond to down by the airport where the conference is held, and there was some sort of traffic something, and it took an hour and a half plus, which was annoying in itself, but that's Mercury retrograde. When I got there, got into my room and unpacked, I had about 45 minutes before I was to go on, and I realized that I left my thumb drive with all my presentations on it on my desk at home. Oh, no. That's how Mercury retrograde works. I was moving too fast. I had my checklist in my mind, and it wasn't even, I didn't even have to look for it. As soon as I took out my computer, I just meant, oh my God. And I could see where on my desk I left it, and I didn't even have to look for it because I knew I never did that motion of putting that into my computer bag. So often retrograde Mercury is an indicator that we need to slow down. And of course, Mercury turning retrograde 3 times a year, it does it often, usually in the same element. This year, there's a retrograde Mercury in Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. It's a fire sign retrograde year. But the thing is that of all the signs, in Aries, Mercury retrograde, again, Aries wants to push ahead, and Mercury retrograde says, not so fast. All right, so let's just take a quick look at the timing of this Mercury retrograde stuff. And what I want to do here is, do displayed points, and I want to take everything out just for a moment, except for Mercury. So there we have a chart with Mercury in Aries. And this is set up to go at a day at a time. And I'm just moving this backwards to, roughly here, the beginning of March, Mercury is in Pisces. Can you see that? So because we're on Earth and Mercury is going around the sun and we're going around the sun, what happens is that Mercury, which goes around the sun every 88 days, 4 times a year, 3 times a year, Mercury catches up to where we are in relationship to the sun, and Mercury comes between the Earth and the sun. And when Mercury gets close to Earth, there's a change in perspective, like having a car right next to you and you're going forward and it looks like it's going backwards. And so Mercury turns retrograde when it gets close to the Earth and comes between the Earth and the sun. From Earth's point of view, it looks like Mercury, even though Mercury, assume the mic is the sun, even though Mercury is going like this, if you just map it against the sky, Mercury looks like it's going like this. Actually, it looks like it's going like this. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like a pendulum going back and forth, which is why Mercury is about the interchange and exchange of information, ideas, and goods. Mercantile, Mercury. Merchandising, Mercury. It's mental, it's cerebral, because it's about the interchange of thoughts and ideas and goods. So if we go back to the beginning of March, we can see, I'm going to do this just a day at a time, that on March 8th, Mercury reaches 4 degrees of Aries. Mark, as Rachel Maddow would say, put a pin in it. Mark that just for a moment, because that 4 degrees of Aries is important, and March 8th represents the beginning of a phase that we are in now. So if you can play your calendars backwards and think what you were doing the beginning of March, there are certain things around that 2nd, 3rd week of March, once Mercury hits that 4 degree point, that are still in play. And here's how this works. That Mercury moves forward. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the sun in this, because it's kind of interesting to see how Mercury, from Earth's point of view, actually goes around the sun. So if we were to go back even further, okay, that's far enough. You can see that stop. All right, so stop. All right, so we can see as January occurs, Mercury is actually an evening star. Then somewhere around March, Mercury jumps. I need to slow this down. It's moving way too fast. All right, so I'm actually backing this up now. So Mercury through March is moving ahead of the sun, because Mercury is actually moving faster than the sun. The sun moves about 1 degree a day, and when Mercury is boogieing, it moves almost 2 degrees a day. So Mercury is gaining on the sun and then is separating from it, getting further and further ahead. And then on April 15th, Mercury gets as far away from the sun as it can get from our perspective. And so it basically, from our perception, there we go. I'm back on the end of March, on March 22nd. Mercury slows down at 16 degrees of Aries. And by March 22nd, March 23rd, Mercury actually begins to look like it's going backwards at 16 degrees of Aries on March 22nd. Okay, so now we have a second point in our little thingy here. We have March 8th and now March 22nd. Okay? Now, as Mercury continues to move backwards, it then will line up with the sun and literally come right across the sun. And you can see that happens right around April 1st. It actually happens on April 1st. So the 1st of April, Mercury comes between the Earth and the sun, and it looks like it's going backwards because of that altered perspective. Okay. Mercury continues moving backwards, and the sun is moving forward, so the two of them are separating now by almost 2 or 3 degrees a day, because as Mercury is moving backwards, the sun is moving forward. And then on April 13th, 14th, Mercury reaches its maximum elongation, its maximum separation, as far away from the sun as it can get, and then it turns direct on April 15th. And it does that at 4 degrees of Aries, which is where it was on March 8th. So in other words, from March 8th until April 16th, 15th, there's like a piece that it's almost like we revisit those events and those things that we may have started back in the beginning of March that are now back in our lives. And then Mercury starts moving forward again. The sun's now moved on into Taurus. Mercury is moving forward, gaining on the sun. It moves into Taurus in May. We're jumping ahead a little bit. And you can see that what happens is that then Mercury will catch up with the sun, move ahead of the sun, and that same thing will continue. But now let's just move back here a bit, back to April. And so there's Mercury moving ahead. And on May 3rd, Mercury reaches that 16 degree Aries point, which is where it turned retrograde. So what this means is from March 8th until May 3rd, Mercury is moving through an area of the sky that it visits 3 times. Once going forward, then once going backward, and then once going forward again. And it's not until May 3rd that our mental functions, our thoughts, our ideas, our communication is finally moving into new territory. What that means is that April, even though Mercury turns direct on April 15th, we're still working old stuff. And the technical word for this period of time, from where Mercury touches the point to where it will later retrograde back to, until Mercury moves clear of the point where it went retrograde, that area, in this case from 4 degrees to 16 degrees of Aries, over a period of time from March 8th through May 3rd, this is called the shadow. This is Mercury's shadow. You may hear this term, and it's just that if you have planets in your chart between 4 degrees and 16 degrees of Aries, or for that matter, between 4 degrees and 16 degrees of any planet, Mercury will make an aspect with that, either conjunct or square or opposed or trine or sextile or quincunx. Mercury will make an aspect with that planet in your chart, and then make an aspect again when it retrogrades, and then make another aspect when it goes direct, all within this 2-month period of time. Normally, Mercury moves so quickly that when it goes over a point, we just get it for a few hours or a day or two. But when Mercury turns retrograde and it activates a point in our chart, that event has more weight. I mean that metaphysically, it's not going to tip a scale. But it creates events that otherwise it may not, because somehow we're not willing to let go of whatever that event is, or even if we're willing to, reality won't let us. All right, let's come back to the all the planets. All right, here. Whoop. Okay, here we are. Oh, somehow we jumped to May. Not somehow, I jumped us to May. I'm willing to take responsibility for. All right, so let's, so this is basically the theme of the month of April. It's the conflict, the square between the sign of Aries and the sign of Capricorn. Those two signs are 90 degrees apart. They're both cardinal signs. Aries starts spring, Capricorn starts winter. And so this feeling of let's do it, let's not. Let's go, let's stop. I'm hot, I'm cold. I'm excited, I'm depressed. It's these opposite feelings of yes, no, gas, brake, accelerate, stop, that we're working with through this whole time. And although if we're paying attention, this can be a very profound period of time, because a race car driver, when a race car driver works the gas and brake, they're not using either one by itself. They're constantly gas, brake, gas, brake. When you do that, you can actually gain a high level of efficiency so that you don't lose control and go off the cliff around the curve, and yet you can still move as fast as you can. So it's not all bad news, but it might feel frustrating and in some aspect of our life, depending upon what area of the chart Mercury is moving through as it moves through Aries now. All right, so we have a couple of sign changes this month. We have a couple of lunations. We've come off January and March. We had 3 lunations in one month. A lunation is either a new moon or a full moon. We had a blue moon in January, where we had a full moon the first and last day of the month. We had no full moons in February, so in March we had a full moon the first day and the last day of the month. And now in April we're back to the regular stuff, if you will. So as we move through April, we started off with the Sun lining up with Mercury, which we talked about, Mars lining up with Saturn, but now we have Mercury in the beginning degrees. I'm sorry, let's go back here. We have Mercury now having turned retrograde, and Mercury is actually making a square with Saturn and Mars. Can you see this here? Here's Mercury right there, and here's Saturn and Mars. This actually represents a 90-degree angle, a square, and so Mercury retrograding is squaring Mars and Saturn, which is exacerbating. I knew there was a word there. It's exacerbating this do it, don't do it, hot, cold, yes, no, and that's on April 4th and 5th. That on April 4th, Mercury squares Mars. On the 5th, it squares Saturn. We may be all excited, we're agitated, we're argumentative, because Mercury is communication, Mars is anger. So it might be that we're argumentative on the 4th when Mercury squares Mars, but on the 5th, we're shut down. Or we realize maybe that we went too far and that we need to apologize or pull back. Or maybe something real happens from the stand that we've already taken. It's not always a negative outcome. On April 7th, okay, let's go back to here. On April 7th, Venus, which is moving through Taurus, and remember, Venus in Taurus is a sweet deal. Venus in Taurus moves into a position where on the 7th through the 10th, Venus is squaring first Saturn, then Mars. Can you see that? Venus reaches 9 degrees of Taurus, earth sign, 9 degrees of Capricorn, Saturn, earth sign, and Mars at 11. When Venus trines are harmonious, expressive aspects. This is good news. Excuse me. This is good news. This is a period of time when there is some stability in our lives in those things that are Venusian. What's Venusian? Blinds. No, that's Venetian. Never mind. Venusian are things that have to do with Venus, which are primarily things of value, whether it's physical value, money, nice things, or emotional value, love, beauty. And so when Venus makes this trine to both Saturn and Mars, we might expect some stability in those areas to creep into our lives, which is nice, except the Sun moving through mid-degrees Aries is making a square to Pluto, which becomes exact right there, actually on the 10th, but you can think on the 10th and 11th. And there's also a deeper power struggle. There's something going on that may force us to define boundaries, or at least stand up to something that that is encroaching on our boundaries. On April 14th, actually the 14th, 15th are power days, because on April 14th, we have a slow-moving aspect that has been in play all month and will be for a month. And this is a sextile between Jupiter and Pluto. These are slower moving planets, and Jupiter, which has moved forward and is now retrograde and is moving forward again, this Jupiter this Jupiter sextile, I thought I wrote these dates down here. I have them somewhere. The Jupiter sextile Pluto, actually the first one hit back in January. The second one, as it's retrograde, is now, and the third one is sometime later this fall, and for whatever reason, I don't seem to have that date in front of me. But the point is here, here it is. Yeah, the first one was on January 15th. The second one is April 14th. And the third and final time that Jupiter sextiles Pluto is on September 12th. Jupiter is good news. It brings things up and out into the open. Pluto is hidden. It's the hell realms. It's the subconscious. So throughout this whole year, we are dealing with Jupiter in Scorpio, a hidden sign, a plutonic sign, if you will. Jupiter working with Pluto is taking that magnifying lens and aiming it into dark corners and bringing shit out into the open that we kind of knew, but we didn't know, or we didn't want to know. And this relates to perhaps hidden stuff in government, whether it's financial things, whether it's power plays, whether it's, you know the drill, I don't have to elucidate all of them. But it's also, because it's Scorpio and Pluto, it's also about power. Pluto and Jupiter in Scorpio, it's about sexuality. And so the whole Me Too movement in some ways is tied up with this Jupiter sextile to Pluto, which is in some way healthily bringing this stuff out into the open, even though the stuff isn't easy to assimilate and it's not pleasant. Also the gun, you know, Never Again movement is also in some way tied to this thing that we've known, it's been there, but now as Jupiter is forming the sextile with Pluto, it's bringing a different light onto it and bringing it out into the open. And I don't care, well, I do care. I was going to say, I don't care what your position is on these issues. The fact is that the astrology is working. But I do care what your position is, but I don't want to go there now. So this Jupiter-Pluto thing is sitting with us all through the month, and in some way is bringing things out into the open. Now, I said the 13th, 14th, 15th were powerful days, Well, what's happening during that period of time is the moon is actually moving, because the moon moves faster than the sun. There's the 13th, the 14th, there's the 15th, and on the 15th we have a new moon, and the new moon is in Aries, and this new moon is conjunct Uranus. Uranus has been in Aries for 7 years. In May, Uranus leaves Aries, moves into Taurus. One of the lectures that I gave at Norwalk was called Breaking Up is Hard to Do, and it wasn't about relationships, it was about the substance of Earth itself, as Uranus, the planet of breaking up, of breaking through. Uranus, the planet of lightning striking and relieving tension. Uranus moves from the idea realm, from the conceptual realm, from the action realm of Aries, and into the substantial realm of physicality, materiality of Taurus. Next month I will talk quite a bit more about this, because this, I think, is setting the stage for changes in currency, cyber currency, Uranus in Taurus. It's setting the stage for changes in physicality, fashion, clothing. I think we will see intelligent clothing, where you can basically put something on and push a few buttons and have it be whatever color and pattern you want. This is stuff that will happen while Uranus is moving through Taurus. There'll be stuff certainly about Earth and Earth changes, because Taurus is Earth. Again, I don't want to go too far into that. However, this new moon on April 15th is very much a new moon that is about the newness of what's going to happen and where we are. And it's a very powerful transitional new moon, because this is the last new moon that will be able to be in the same. This is the last Aries new moon that will occur with Uranus nearby, or Uranus in the same sign, because the next new moon, Uranus will be on into the next sign of Taurus. The other thing that I think is significant about this new moon is that it is also squaring, not exactly, but it's squaring Pluto. And so again, we have this whole thing of the power and control that's coming from underneath that is being brought into the open. And we have another piece that's developing, fits into this, and is exact over the next couple of days, and that is Venus. We talked about Venus's harmonious trine with Saturn and Mars, but Venus is coming into an opposition with Jupiter, and as such, it will make a harmonious trine with Pluto. And I think that we can look to this period of time, this Venus-Jupiter and Venus-Pluto as a very powerful changing period of time after this new moon. And the dates on this are roughly April 16th, it opposes Jupiter, and it trines Pluto on the 17th. So this new moon has a lot of energy about things that are hidden, things that have been tucked away, things that are Venusian, that have to do with money, things that have to do with Jupiter, excess and exuberance, maybe government spending, maybe funding coming from, let's say, other countries and political campaigns. I don't know, but I will expect that we will see some action around this. Of course, I guess we can't escape it. We've been seeing it for months, but I think this will be a critical period of time when a lot of stuff comes out into the open. On April 17th, there's two other things that happen that are a bit more subtle, but sometimes subtle is more powerful. One of the things that occurs is that on April 17th, Saturn turns retrograde. The outer planets turn retrograde when the Earth begins to come between them and the Sun. Again, when the planet gets closer to the Sun, when the planet gets closer to Earth than it is at other times during the year. But the outer planets can be retrograde. They typically they all turn retrograde once a year, and they can be retrograde for 4 to 5 months a year. So again, it's not so significant that Saturn turns retrograde, but it is significant that the structure and the tests and the Saturnian obstacles that we're dealing with, if Saturn is impacting a point in your chart, you ain't done. because Saturn will come back over that point and then back over it again. And unlike Mercury, where it stays in its shadow for, a month and a half or two, Saturn basically can take up to 9 months to contact a point, go back over it again retrograde, and then direct 9 months later. And so this Saturn retrograde in Capricorn is significant and is important. The other thing that's important is that on April 17th, Chiron, and Chiron is, when it was discovered, it was thought to be a planet, and then it was like, no, it's an asteroid, but it was out past the orbit of Saturn, so they decided it wasn't an asteroid, it was a comet, and it really was the first minor planet that was discovered that are now classified as centaurs, because they have double lives. Chiron actually is in an orbit that comes inside of Saturn and outside of Uranus. It's very elliptical. And Chiron is often considered the wounded healer. I don't want to go too deep into it now because even though it's important, it is considered to be a quote-unquote minor planet. But Chiron has this symbol. It is right here. And Chiron's Chiron is about a 50-year cycle, and because of its elliptical orbit, it can spend as short as 4 years in a sign and as long as 10 years in a sign. Chiron has been in Pisces forever. It moved into Pisces in 2011, so it's been in Pisces now for 6-7 years, and it will be in Aries until 2026. Pisces, though, isn't only our wounds, although it is. There's a wonderful book by psychologist Robert Johnson, a Jungian, who wrote these little monographs that you may have seen. They're called He, She, They. Does anyone know these books? Anyhow, he wrote a book, and I always get, one of these days I need to memorize this title. It's a bizarre title, but I get close. The name of the book is The Wounded Feeling Function in Western Society. No, the actual name is The Story of the Fisher King and the Handless Maiden, a critical analysis of the wounded feeling function in Western society. It's a mouthful. The book is not that long. I mean, the title is longer than the book. The book is maybe 80 pages, 90 pages, 110. It's a thin little, like a monograph. And it basically talks about these two stories that popped up in the Middle Ages around the time that the Grail story appeared. And I don't want to dig into the story right now. You can find it online. But there is a whole thing about how we all have a place in us that is human and fucked up. In other words, all the therapy in the world, all the sex, drugs, rock and roll, loving, yoga, meditation, add whatever all the other things are onto your list. All of that doesn't heal some of the stuff that we each have. I remember Ram Dass a number of years ago saying that there isn't a neurosis that he had at 19 years of age that at 70 years of age he still didn't have. It was just that they didn't control his life. He referred to them, he goes, they were like nebuchadnezzars. Matter of fact, I recall him saying, it's like, oh, sexual perversion. I haven't seen you for a while. Come on in, let's chat. It's these parts of ourselves that we don't fix, that we just incorporate. But part of the wounded healer philosophy is like Christ fishing for souls, and this is the relationship to the Fisher King in that book I just mentioned, is that what we do is we move through life and we look for people who have similar wounds, and we salve our own wound by helping them or fixing them. It doesn't matter whether we're a doctor or a healer, this is one of the things that we do. So without digging too much further into Chiron, other than saying it's an important planet or planetoid, minor planet, centaur, whatever you want to call it, Chiron is moving into Aries. And this is big news. And it does this on April 16th, April 17th. And Chiron for the last 7-8 years in Pisces has been about the mind-body connection. It's been about spiritual healing. It's been about the medical community dealing with metaphysical healing, with the mind-body connection, the relationship between spirit and body, between psyche and soma, if you will. And as Chiron moves into Aries, I think that we can expect to see major breakthroughs in new modalities that really change the way that we relate to healing of the body. Now, some of these things are already out there, probably, but I think that we will see things that have to do with technology even that allow us to change the name of the game when it comes to how we work with our Chirons. I don't want to say too much about it. We'll be revisiting this topic over the weeks, months, even months and years ahead. But this is a change, and when outer planets change, they do change the zeitgeist, the actual energy itself. All right. We have a couple other things to cover. We're nearly there. So we have the new moon, Saturn. We have Chiron changing signs. On April 18th, let's get rid of this. On April 18th, we have the sun, which is moving toward the latter degrees of Aries. The sun catches up with every planet except for the moon. It catches up with every planet once a year because the planets move slowly, all the outer planets in particular, and the sun goes around once a year. So once a year, the sun will line up with Uranus. The sun is lined up with Uranus 7 times while Uranus has been in Aries. Next year, when the sun is lined up with Uranus, it will occur in the new sign or the next sign of Taurus. So there's some culmination energy around the cycle of Uranus being in Aries. And I just want to throw out there the thought that on the day Uranus moved into Aries, in March of 2010. That was the day, that was the day of the Fukushima earthquake tidal wave meltdown. 2011. I stopped because I couldn't remember whether it was 2010 or 2011. This is awakening. Uranus isn't bad, although it sometimes can go, oh my God. I mean, obviously it was bad if you happen to be, living in Fukushima. But it releases energy. And so when the sun lines up with Uranus on April 18th, and this is so closely tied to Chiron moving into Aries and to the new moon and to the Venus opposition to Pluto and the Venus opposition to Jupiter and trining Pluto, I'm looking for some real movement with global, social, cultural, political, and personal issues toward the middle of April. Got it? All right. So as we move on, by the following day, the 19th, actually between the 19th and the 20th, but on the 19th, the sun, late in the day on the 19th, the sun leaves Aries and moves into Taurus. Now, understand that Venus has been in Taurus, and Venus will actually escape from Taurus, moving into Gemini in early May. But actually it does it on April 24th. So we have a few days where the sun and Venus are both in Taurus, and this gives us a little bit of, it's like we can find the ground. It's like we can put our feet on the ground, and that will last, for the entire time the sun is in Taurus. But just a few days later, on the 24th, Venus escapes Taurus and moves into Gemini, and all of a sudden, even though we still have our feet on the ground, it's like Venus in Gemini likes the idea of flying, likes the idea of being distracted. Venus in Gemini it's curious, but more than curious, it loves being distracted from the straight line. Venus and Gemini. Anyone here know that they have Venus and Gemini? There's a scene from, I don't watch movies these days, I haven't for decades, but I saw Rain Man, and the scene in Rain Man where he goes, they're in Las Vegas, and he says lots of glittery things, or I don't know if anyone can remember that line. Pretty things, glitter, like he's like just, that's what Venus and Gemini is. It's like, oh, sparkly, shiny things. And every idea and every person and every book and becomes another universe of potential thrill, excitement, and distraction from what you really need to be doing. Now, the good news is that with the sun in Taurus, all the way through the middle end of May, we still have our feet on the ground. And I'm not saying that Gemini is a bad thing, because being distracted is also the key to play and invention of new things. So everything in astrology is good news, bad news. Although there are astrologers who will tell you that everything in astrology is bad news. Don't buy it. Okay, so the 19th, the sun moves into Taurus. On the 22nd, Pluto turns retrograde. Again, I don't spend a lot of time in these talks talking about the outer planet retrogrades. But again, if you have planets in the shadow, in the gray area where Pluto will revisit, then I think that those retrogrades certainly can be more important for you. April 23rd, April 24th. This is an optimistic day. This is a cool period of time because we have Mars forming a sextile with Jupiter. This is like, uplifting, enthusiastic. It's an I can do it. I can do things even that I can't do. And you find out that you can't, but for a moment you think you can. And that's cool. And Venus moves into Gemini. And Venus also forms a sextile with Chiron now in Aries. This is actually a cool couple of days, but in astrology we often get the good news followed by the bad news, or let's say the easy news followed by the hard news. And the hard news that follows this is that Mercury, now direct on the 25th, forms a square with Saturn. You see that? On the 25th, there's the, come on. All right, this won't let me do it. There's Mercury forming a 90-degree square with Saturn. And remember, this square that Mercury is forming with Saturn is actually the third square, because Mercury went direct, retrograde, and direct within the range of being 90 degrees to Saturn. And so that square to Saturn occurred for the first time on March 10th, the second time on April 5th, and the third time on April 25th. And the clever ones of us will take out our daytimers, Outlook, calendars, whatever we have, and we'll connect the dots between whatever it is we ran into conceptually that stopped us from finishing whatever we were doing back in the beginning of March and the beginning of April. And by the end of April, on the 25th, if we've done our work, Saturn says, okay, final exam, you show Saturn your stuff, and Saturn either says, nope, let it go, you can't do it, or it says, you got it, go ahead. That's how Saturn works. That's on the 25th. Also on the 25th, we have Mars, which earlier in the month lined up with on the 1st, lined up with Saturn in Capricorn. On the 25th, Mars lines up with Pluto. And when Mars lines up with Pluto, we're in a rough neighborhood. I mean, Mars is the warrior. Mars is anger and aggression. And Pluto is transformation after death. Nice. Pluto is regeneration. Pluto is the phoenix that arises from the ashes of the ruins of destruction. Operative words here: ashes, ruins, destruction. But you see, Pluto is metamorphosis. It's also the caterpillar that transforms into the butterfly. And so it may not be fun for the caterpillar while it's black goo something inside the chrysalis, inside the cocoon, but something happens in this death rebirth process. And when Mars lines up with Pluto, I think that the stuff can get tough. And whether this becomes part of an international pissing contest, which we have going with way too many countries right now. I say we, I mean everyone except for us. All right, everyone except for me. But we may see some of this stuff come to a head. We may see some of the legal stuff that's been going on come to a head. This is not necessarily an easy or pretty day because often the stuff that comes out is the stuff that we don't like from the people who are in control, who basically hit back hard with a hammer bigger than ours. So we might look at this period of time, though, and see what it is and understand that we need to work with this energy. This too will pass. One of the lessons of astrology is that I don't care how good it is or bad it is, how wonderful it is, how loving it is, how hateful, the planets keep moving. You know, and everything. I think this is Buddhism 101. You know, nothing is permanent, even those things that are permanent. But this is also a day when we can accomplish a lot, because if we use our intention to work for the good, if we use our intention to heal, this then becomes a day when our energy is unstoppable, just as unstoppable as the resistance that we may face. So the ante goes up, but also it's a day to push for what it is that you want. Just be aware that you can inadvertently ride roughshod over things or people and cause damage that you don't necessarily mean to. So it's good to be aware of the intensity of this energy around the 25th. By 25th, 26th. And then it's followed on the 29th by the Sun's trine to Saturn. And this is a day, the 28th, 29th, 30th, when the Sun trines Saturn, this is a day when stuff lasts. It may be the things that happened a few days ago when the Mars lined up with Pluto now is translated into something that has substance. This is a day when a law can be passed that is binding, that is really perhaps something that we need, because Saturn being structure isn't only bad, it's the structure that we use like scaffolding to build what it is that we need to build. And the Sun's trine to Saturn is certainly a time, if you're into ritual in your own life, we're coming into the full moon here also, but the days before the full moon on the 28th and 29th, by doing ritual and meditation and creating intention, this is actually picking up on some really solid, stable energy in the universe. And that leads us to later on the 29th, when the Sun, let's back this up a few hours, when the Sun and Moon oppose one another. This is the full moon, which is right about there. On that same day, actually, on April 29th, the full moon occurs at nearly 6 p.m. Pacific time. And this full moon is also incredibly powerful. Let's add the aspects to the moon in here. Dailies. And you can see the moon opposite the sun, but the thing here that gives this full moon such solidity is that Sun trine Saturn that we already talked about. But what that means is that the moon is sextiling Saturn, and so Saturn becomes the hero by the end of the month. It's the person in power that actually holds a position that's real, that makes something stay, and this can be something that's very, very important, not only out there, but again, also in our individual and personal lives. This whole period of time, the end of the month, builds in this kind of making things real and making them work. So,
Can't breathe.
So, the deal for April is very much one of mixed message, but the mixed messages are really what we have to work with. We have somewhere where we are going. We have somewhere to get to. We have something in our minds that is about the expression and moving forward, and at the same time, there's some blockages. There's some hoops that we need to jump through, obstacles that we need to climb over or go around. I can't remember who said this, but someone, not me, said that the obstacles aren't in the path. The obstacles are the path. And so we need to be careful about complaining or about dissing the things that we're overcoming, because it's the act of engaging our own weaknesses out there. It's the act of engaging the things that stop us from getting to where we think we should be. Those are the things that build our internal strength and that create the character that we need. And April is a lot of that this month, because it has a lot of this hold back, go, hold back, go. When, Mercury turns direct on on the 15th, this is a bit of a turning point, but it really takes until the beginning of May, when Mercury is out of its shadow, when we finally feel unencumbered. Do we ever feel unencumbered? When we finally feel unencumbered by our recent crap that we've probably been responsible for creating, that if we use this Mercury retrograde period well, we can actually climb out of the hole so that we can continue on. Thank you for your indulgence, for your paying attention.